Here is my detailed explanation on how to EQ low-tuned guitars. I recently made a video talking about my recording process, just how I go about recording guitars here in my studio, and several of you guys wanted me to go a little bit more in depth on the equalization aspect of my guitar tones and ultimately my mixes and my songs. So this is what this video is about. We're going to talk about what I do and what I like and what is pleasing to my ear and what is beneficial for an overall quality mix using low-tuned guitars, okay? And in this video, we're going to be using my song, Like Frostbite. Pinned comment down below on Spotify, go check it out. That's my signature guitar tuned down to drop F. So we're way down in the lower register, okay? And with low-tuned guitars, there are several problem areas with the different frequencies in that guitar tone. Nice rule of thumb, the lower the tuning is, the more low-end buildup and more low-end information there will be inside of the guitar tone. So you're gonna wanna cut off a lot of low-end because unfortunately for us guitar players, the guitar is not supposed to handle the low end in a quality mix. So a nice rule of thumb for you guys is if you solo your guitars and you're listening to just your guitars in an overall mix, if they sound a little bit thin, I want you guys to fight your inner guitar nerd and realize that that's a good thing because unfortunately the guitar is not responsible for the low end heaviness, which is something that I've had to learn along the way. The bass guitar and the kick drum are responsible for holding down the low end. So we want none of our guitars to interfere with the lower register and the lower frequencies. I cut off anywhere, bare minimum, 90 hertz with my guitars. When I was learning about how to do this through watching similar YouTube videos years ago, the rule of thumb was more or less always 80 hertz, but for me, I've pushed it a little bit further. I feel as like if you're gonna cut the low end, right? So I always start at 90 hertz, but anywhere, depending on the project, the tuning, my vibe of the day, I cut anywhere from 90 hertz to like 100 and 105 hertz. Just no low end. We don't need it. It's gonna make your guitars sound thin on their own in an isolated setting, but that's a good thing because the mix will really benefit from that, from my own experience, okay? On the other side, we gotta get rid of some high end because the high end, the really like almost inaudible frequencies and energies being built up inside of the guitar tone, those are unwanted for the guitar because again, in the overall mix and the context of a mix, the cymbals, all of the brass, we'll say, belongs up there. So if you have guitar clashing with your cymbals, the cymbals won't cut as well, and therefore now we're like losing our cymbals and we're losing any like sort of reference of time because the cymbals are getting washed out. I usually cut it around anywhere from 9 to 13K, but for the sake of this video, 11 to 12K is a fair cutoff point for the high end with your guitars, okay? Those are the basics. Those are like our parameters. The guitar is a mid-range focus instrument. We need the guitar to live in the mid-range of our overall frequency spectrum in our mix. Now, this is something I've never personally heard anybody do, and this is from my own experience, and I want you guys to try this in your projects. I want you guys to take your drum track, whether that's MIDI drums or an actual drummer, go to the drum bus or like where everything's coming out of one track, a stereo track, and I want you guys to just put an EQ on your drums. No alterations, no peaks and valleys, no high cuts or low cuts, just a graph so you can see what is being played and what is, you know, spiking in terms of like when you hit a certain drum, what is being registered on the frequency spectrum. And I want you guys to pay attention to your snare. We're more or less already good with the kick because we cut off all the low end, right? But the snare, the frequency responses of snares does live in the mid-range. And through my own MIDI drums, I think I'm using the Lorna Shore in this song that I recorded last year, the snare hits spike in two areas, around 200 to 250 hertz and around 700, 750 hertz. I always do a dip in the 250 hertz range on my guitar track to let the snare breathe a little bit better. And this is a common misconception, and I'll just say it all right here, my philosophy. If something's lacking in the mix, like if something's quiet in the mix, the natural idea would be to just grab the fader and I'll just turn it up, right? But you can get away with hearing something better if you do the opposite, and that is take away from something else. Because every time you turn up something in the mix, you're losing your headroom, and the mix can start to get a little washed out, a little clippy sounding, technical terms here, clippy sounding. You'll start to push the lack of headroom, and therefore your mix will start to kind of fall apart and feel like all blown out, kind of like when you have a blown out speaker in like your car or something like that. So rather than turning up the thing that is quiet, turn down the frequencies of something else in your mix. So like I said, 250 and around like 750, something like that with my snares. The next EQ move I do is I take out around 500 to 600 hertz in my guitar tone. Now, that is not directly in competition with the other frequency that's being spiked on my snare. Like I said, my snare is around like 750, something like that, but it's close. The reason why I don't go directly for 750 on my guitar tones is because I personally just don't like the way that sounds in my guitars. So I cut out a little bit of the 500 hertz, 550, something like that. That is a more pleasing guitar tone, and some of the snare frequencies do live in that area ever so slightly. So if I can just cut away some of the guitar sounds that I don't, one, really like, and two, it is helping the snare ever so slightly, that's a win for me. And just so we're clear, the reason why I'm so focused on the kick and the snare as it pertains to like my guitar to make them all balance and fit and mesh and gel, the kick and the snare is the heartbeat and the pulse of any good rock or metal song. That's what everybody grooves to. That's what keeps the time, the tempo, the energy, and the feel. It's kick and snare. That's what we subconsciously are listening to and latching onto when listening to more or less any song ever made. It's the beat. The beat is what drives the song. Now, there's three other moves I do with the guitar tone. The first one is I do a dip in the EQ spectrum around 4K. I bring some of that down as well, because that is known as the nails on the chalkboard sound. 3 to 5K is really harsh and brittle sounding and a little ear piercing. And it's subtle, but when you take it away and then put it back in, it sticks out like a sore thumb. The next thing I do in terms of EQ is I put a high shelf on my guitar bus. And this sits around like 5 to 6K, and it's ever so slightly. That is to give my guitars a little bit of high end and a little bit of, we'll say, shimmer, I guess. That is to make my guitar cut, bite, be a little gnarly and nasty sounding, a little bit brighter sounding. Because, you know, I'm going back and forth in terms of low end and high end and mid range, and I'm going all over the place in terms of frequencies. But from my own experience and through my, tracks and to my ears, having a little bit more high end is pleasing to my ears. So I want to boost that ever so slightly. that makes it cut and makes it stand out, it makes it have bite. It doesn't feel muddy. It may feel a little harsh to somebody's ears, but I can live with that. I would rather it be a little bit too bright than too dark. And the last thing I do is I do a slight boost, a broad band around 1K, because like I've said in this video several times, the guitar is a mid-range focus instrument. And use this sparingly and use this to taste, because in my opinion, I want my guitars to stand out in the mid-range. That's where they shine. That's where like all the juice and all the meat and potatoes of a guitar tone lives, the mid-range. So I feel confident in boosting that ever so slightly, because that's where I want the guitar to shine arguably the most. So everybody, that's how I EQ my guitars. So I hope you guys learned something, and whether or not you agree or not, at the very least, you now hear another man's perspective, and you can take that and do with it what you will, but you now have a different perspective potentially on how somebody such as myself goes about EQing guitars to where I feel it's pleasing and beneficial to my ears and to my overall mixes in my songs. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe. Let me know your thoughts and opinions. Like I said, hope you learned something today. All right, everybody. I love you guys so much. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to come hang out with me. And with that being said, everybody, I'll see you guys in a video very, very soon. Later.